Love After 60. 5 things older men can't stand hearing from women. Understanding what deeply frustrates mature men in relationships isn't about walking on eggshells or suppressing your authentic voice. It's about recognizing which communication patterns can damage even the strongest connections and learning how to express your needs and concerns in ways that bring you closer together rather than driving you apart. After 60, both men and women have developed sensitivities and trigger points that, when accidentally activated, can create unnecessary conflict and distance. Welcome back to Wise Advice for Elderly. Today, I'm going to reveal 5 specific things that can cause mature men to shut down emotionally or become defensive, even when they love you deeply. This isn't about changing who you are or avoiding difficult conversations. It's about understanding how to communicate your legitimate needs and concerns in ways that invite connection rather than create resistance. When you understand what triggers defensive reactions, you can address the same issues more effectively while preserving the emotional intimacy you've worked to build. But first, if you're ready to learn how to communicate your truth in ways that bring you closer together rather than driving you apart, and want to understand the psychology behind masculine defensive reactions, hit that subscribe button now. Here at Wise Advice for Elderly, we help you create relationships built on mutual understanding and effective communication that honors both people's emotional needs.
Thing number 1. You never or you always. Maya Angelou once said, "Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with deeper meaning." When you begin a sentence with "you never" or "you always," your human voice is infusing those words with absolute judgment that immediately puts mature men on the defensive, even when your underlying concern is completely valid. Men over 60 have lived long enough to understand the complexity of human behavior and the unfairness of absolute statements. When they hear, "you never listen to me," or "you always put your family first," their immediate internal response is often to search for exceptions and evidence that contradicts the absolute nature of your statement, rather than hearing the emotional need underneath your words. Robert, 68, described his reaction. When Margaret would say, "You never help with planning our activities," or "you always make decisions without consulting me," my first instinct was to defend myself by listing all the times I had helped or consulted her. I knew she was trying to tell me something important, but the absolute nature of those statements made me feel like she wasn't seeing the efforts I was making, which made me want to prove her wrong rather than understand what she needed. The underlying message you're trying to communicate, that you need more help with planning or more inclusion in decisions, is completely reasonable and important. But when it's delivered as an absolute statement about their character or behavior, mature men often hear it as unfair criticism rather than a request for change. Instead of "you never," try "I've been feeling like I need more," or "I would love it if we could." This approach communicates the same need while inviting collaboration rather than triggering defense. The goal is to be heard and understood, not to be right about their patterns. Thing number 2. Comparing him to other men. Carl Jung observed, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But when you compare a mature man to other men, whether it's how romantic your friend's husband is, how helpful your neighbor's partner is, or how emotionally expressive other men can be, you're triggering one of the deepest wounds that can slowly erode even the most loving relationships." Here's what we need to understand. Men over 60 have spent decades, often through trial, error, heartbreak, and hard-won wisdom, developing their own authentic approach to love, partnership, and expressing care.
These aren't just habits they've fallen into. They're often the culmination of a lifetime of learning how to love in ways that feel genuine to them. When they hear comparisons to other men, something profound happens beneath the surface. They don't just hear a suggestion or a casual observation. They hear evidence that their particular way of loving, perhaps quiet and steady rather than dramatic and romantic, perhaps practical rather than poetic, isn't enough. They hear that you're cataloging other men's strengths while measuring their perceived shortcomings. Thomas, 69, shared his painful reaction with raw honesty. When Susan would mention how thoughtful her friend's husband was for bringing flowers every week, or how romantic her sister's partner was for planning surprise dates, something inside me just crumbled. I felt like nothing I did was good enough, like I was being graded against men I'd never even met. He continued, his voice growing quieter. I showed love by fixing things for her before they broke, by remembering that she liked her coffee a certain way and making it perfectly every morning, by making sure she felt secure and protected. But those comparisons made me feel like my way of caring was invisible, like it didn't count because it wasn't flashy or obvious. This touches on something deeper than wounded pride. For many men at this stage of life, the way they express love has been refined through decades of relationships, perhaps through the loss of previous partners, through learning what truly matters when time feels more precious. When that approach is compared unfavorably to others, it can feel like their entire emotional language is being rejected. The cruel irony is that your intention behind these comparisons is often loving. You're trying to inspire or gently suggest ways he could express love that would mean the world to you. You're hoping he'll hear your longing and respond to it. But the impact is usually the opposite. It makes him feel like he's being measured against other men and found lacking, which often causes him to withdraw his natural expressions of love rather than expand them. Margaret, 64, realized this after months of wondering why her partner had become less affectionate. She kept mentioning how sweet it was that her daughter's boyfriend would leave little notes for her, thinking maybe David would get the hint. Instead, he stopped doing the little things he used to do, bringing me tea in the evening, texting me sweet messages during the day. Later, he told me he figured since those things weren't worth mentioning compared to love notes, why bother? The path forward requires understanding that each person's love language has been shaped by their entire life story. Instead of comparing him to others, try expressing what you'd love directly and specifically. I would feel so cherished if you left me little notes sometimes. Or something that would really touch my heart would be surprise flowers, even just picking one from the garden. Even more powerfully, try first acknowledging the ways he already shows love that you treasure. I love how you always make sure my car is running perfectly. It makes me feel so cared for. And you know what else would make me feel special? If sometimes you...
Thing number 3. We need to talk. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." But when you say those 4 dreaded words, "we need to talk," to a mature man, you're inadvertently triggering an internal alarm system that transforms him from your loving partner into someone bracing for battle, putting him in defensive mode before you've even shared what's truly on your heart. Here's what happens in those crucial seconds after you speak those words. His mind doesn't hear an invitation to connect. Instead, it hears a warning signal that's been conditioned by decades of life experience. This phrase has become so deeply associated with relationship confrontations, ultimatums, breakups, or serious problems requiring intense emotional excavation that his nervous system literally prepares for threat. Men over 60 carry the weight of relationship history, perhaps previous marriages that ended in difficult conversations, workplace scenarios where "we need to talk" meant termination or conflict, or simply years of cultural conditioning that taught them emotional conversations often mean they've done something wrong. When they hear these words, they don't think, oh, wonderful, we're about to have an intimate heart-to-heart. They think, what did I do? What's broken? How much trouble am I in? David, 65, shared his visceral reaction with startling honesty. The moment Patricia would say, we need to talk, it was like my entire body went into crisis mode. My stomach would clench, my shoulders would tense, and I'd immediately start mentally cataloging everything I might have done wrong recently. Even when she just wanted to discuss something completely benign, like vacation plans or visiting her sister, those 4 words made me brace for emotional impact, rather than look forward to sharing thoughts with the woman I love. Patricia later realized the unintended effect of her words. I thought I was being mature and direct by announcing we needed to talk. I had no idea David was spending the time between my announcement and our actual conversation preparing his defenses instead of opening his heart. This creates a tragic irony. The very phrase meant to invite important communication often destroys the receptive, open-hearted space necessary for meaningful dialogue. You want connection, he prepares for confrontation. You want to share, he readies to defend. The problem isn't your desire to communicate. Mature, lasting relationships absolutely require ongoing dialogue about feelings, needs, dreams, and concerns. The problem is that this particular phrase has become so loaded with negative associations that it shuts down the very receptiveness you're hoping to create. Small changes in your approach can create dramatically different responses. Instead of, we need to talk, which sounds like a summons to court, try gentler, more specific invitations that signal collaboration rather than confrontation. I'd love to get your thoughts on something that's been on my mind. Can we put our heads together and figure out how to handle? I have something I'd like to share with you. When would be a good time? I've been thinking about something and I'd really value your perspective. Notice how these alternatives create curiosity rather than dread, partnership rather than judgment. They invite him into the conversation as your ally, not as someone who needs to be corrected or managed. If you're starting to understand how small changes in word choice can dramatically transform the quality of your most important conversations, give this video a thumbs up. Sometimes the smallest shifts create the most profound connection.
Thing number 4. You don't understand how I feel. Rumi wrote, "Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray." When you tell a mature man that he doesn't understand how you feel, you're often pushing away the very person you're trying to draw closer to your emotional experience, creating distance at the exact moment you're seeking connection. This statement can be particularly devastating for men over 60 because it suggests that their genuine attempts to understand and connect with your feelings have not only failed, but failed so completely that you've given up on their ability to reach you. It often leaves them feeling helpless, inadequate, and shut out from the very intimacy they're trying to create with you. What makes this phrase especially painful is that it often comes after they've been listening, trying to offer comfort, or attempting to problem solve. Essentially, after they've been showing care in the way they know how. To hear, "You don't understand how I feel," can feel like being told their love language doesn't count. Their efforts are invisible, and their caring heart simply isn't capable of reaching yours. James, 67, described his frustration with raw vulnerability. When Carol would say, "You don't understand how I feel," it was like being told I was emotionally colorblind, that there was this whole spectrum of her experience that I was fundamentally incapable of seeing. I might not understand perfectly, but I was usually trying desperately to understand. That statement made me feel like my efforts were not just inadequate, but pointless. Like there was some mysterious emotional language I was supposed to speak fluently, but had never been taught. He paused, his voice growing quieter. The worst part was that it made me want to stop trying. If I couldn't understand anyway, why keep reaching for something that seemed impossible to grasp? Carol later realized the unintended cruelty of her words. I was feeling so alone in my emotions that I wanted James to know how isolated I felt. But by telling him he didn't understand, I was actually creating more isolation for both of us. I was building walls when what I really wanted was bridges. Here's what we need to recognize. Perfect understanding between any two people is rare and precious when it happens, but it's not necessary for love, support, and meaningful connection. What matters infinitely more is the effort to understand, the willingness to care about your feelings even when complete comprehension feels impossible, and the desire to keep trying to reach across the space between two different hearts. Think about it this way. After 60-plus years of life, we've all developed our own emotional landscapes shaped by unique experiences, losses, joys, and perspectives. Expecting someone to fully understand how you feel is like expecting them to have lived your exact life. It's not realistic, and it's not necessary for deep love. Instead of "you don't understand how I feel," which closes the door on connection, try approaches that open it wider. Let me help you understand what I'm experiencing. Or, I'm feeling something I'd really like to share with you. Or, I know this might not make complete sense, but here's what's happening in my heart. These phrases invite him into your emotional world, rather than telling him he's forever locked out of it. They position him as your partner in understanding, rather than as someone who's failing at loving you properly. Remember, the goal isn't perfect understanding, it's loving witness. Sometimes, the most healing thing isn't having someone fully grasp your feelings, but having someone care enough to keep listening, keep trying, and keep holding space for your heart, even when your experience is different from anything they've known.
Thing number 5. Fine or nothing's wrong when something clearly is. Viktor Frankl observed, those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. But when you say fine or nothing's wrong, while your tone, body language, and energy clearly indicate otherwise, you're creating a confusing situation where mature men don't know how to respond appropriately. Men over 60 have learned to take people at their word while also sensing when something doesn't add up. When you say nothing's wrong, but everything about your demeanor suggests otherwise, it creates a no-win situation where they're damned if they probe further and damned if they accept your words at face value. William, 66, explained his dilemma. When Linda would say, "I'm fine," in a tone that clearly indicated she wasn't fine, I never knew what to do. If I accepted her words and moved on, she'd later be upset that I didn't notice she was bothered. But if I kept asking what was wrong after she said nothing was wrong, she'd get frustrated that I wasn't respecting her answer. I felt like I was playing a guessing game where I could never win. The challenge is that sometimes you need time to process your feelings before discussing them, or you're not sure if your concerns are worth bringing up. But saying you're fine when you're not creates confusion and can make him feel like he has to be a mind reader to understand what you need. Instead of fine when you're not, try "I'm working through something right now," or "I need a little time to sort out my thoughts, but I'd like to talk about it later." This honesty allows you space to process while keeping communication open and clear. Are you beginning to see how these communication patterns can create unnecessary barriers, even in loving relationships? Leave a comment below about which pattern you recognize most in your own communication style.
Understanding the deeper dynamic.
These 5 communication patterns: absolute statements, comparisons to other men, ominous conversation openers, declarations about their inability to understand, and indirect communication about problems all share something in common. They tend to trigger defensive reactions rather than creating the connection and understanding you're actually seeking. The important thing to understand is that your underlying needs and concerns in each of these situations are completely valid. Wanting more consideration, desiring certain expressions of love, needing to discuss important topics, wanting to feel understood, and having problems that need addressing are all legitimate relationship needs. The power of approach. The difference between creating connection and triggering defensiveness often lies not in what you're communicating, but in how you're communicating it. When you approach conversations with curiosity rather than accusation, with specific requests rather than absolute judgments, and with invitation rather than confrontation, you're much more likely to get the response you're hoping for. Why this matters more after 60. At this stage of life, both men and women have developed communication patterns over decades, and they've also developed sensitivities and triggers based on past experiences. Understanding these dynamics isn't about tiptoeing around someone's ego. It's about communicating effectively so that your important messages are heard and responded to, rather than deflected or defended against. Creating better outcomes. When you adjust these communication patterns, you often discover that the same concerns you've been trying to address become much easier to discuss and resolve. Men who might have been defensive or dismissive become more receptive and collaborative when they don't feel like they're being attacked or criticized. The reciprocal nature. Just as understanding what triggers defensive reactions in men can improve your communication, men who understand what creates emotional safety for women can communicate more effectively too. The goal is mutual understanding and better connection, not one person accommodating the other's limitations. Understanding what mature men find difficult to hear isn't about suppressing your voice or avoiding important conversations. It's about expressing your authentic needs and concerns in ways that invite collaboration rather than triggering defensiveness. When you communicate with awareness of these sensitivities, you often find that the very issues you've been struggling to address become much easier to discuss and resolve. Your feelings, needs, and concerns are valid and important. The goal is simply to express them in ways that create the connection and understanding you're seeking, rather than the resistance and distance you've been experiencing.
If this video helped you understand how to communicate more effectively in mature relationships, make sure to subscribe to Wise Advice for Elderly and share this with someone who could benefit from these insights. Let me know in the comments which communication pattern you want to work on improving. And remember, effective communication is about being heard and understood, not about being right. Remember, wise woman, your voice matters and your needs are important. When you learn to express them in ways that invite connection rather than create resistance, you'll find that the love and understanding you seek becomes much more accessible and lasting.